thanks to jspsales for recommending to me that I review the 13-episode anime series Geneshaft. Now, much like Crest of the Stars, this series also aired on Tech TV during a time where I didn't have access to much cable, so once again, I had never seen this series until it was given to me as a recommendation. I'd tried to do some background digging on this series and found that there was an earlier manga version of this story called Incomplete Arms Geneshaft. My understanding was that there were 2 full books published in Japan, though it's long been out of print and there's basically no English resources on it. It seems like some of the same plot and many of the same characters carry over into Geneshaft, however. Though from what I can gather, it seems that Geneshaft may be a more condensed and incomplete version of this story. Upon first glance at Geneshaft, I was relatively concerned about watching it. This 2001 series did that thing a lot of other early 2000s anime series tried to do, combining CG sets with 2D characters, and it plays a rock and roll soundtrack that makes you think this series is gonna be super extreme! While I was initially turned off by these elements, there were actually parts of the series that ended up surprising me. I'll start by saying that I don't necessarily think that Geneshaft is in any way brilliant or especially smart or explores anything new, but it wasn't as completely mindless as I was expecting either. So the story goes that we're looking at humanity in the 23rd century. Apparently, us people here in the 21st century screwed up things on Earth so bad that humanity decided, well, why don't we start messing with our DNA to make civilization better and save the world? This caused people to be bred to be perfectly suited for different designated skills. Furthermore, humanity decided that the ideal gender ratio between men and women would be 1 man to every 9 women. So there's this complete overabundance of women. Now they say that, and it might lead you to believe that this is gonna be some overly fan-service-y kind of harem anime. That's exactly what I thought it was going to turn out to be. Turns out, though, I was wrong. In the 23rd century, apparently people don't even have sex and children are born in labs. Well, I'm glad that there's only so much fan service in the series, but then if people aren't having sex, then I don't understand the point behind the genders being unbalanced. Furthermore, despite the fact that there are so many women performing almost every job imaginable, the few things women can't do are be in positions of particular power. Captains and backup captains of ships appear to be men, and even a group of old men on Earth who have unnaturally kept themselves alive for 200 years or so are still making all the decisions for humanity. There's still plenty of sexist comments that seem to exist without question in the 23rd century, too.
His command decisions are always the correct ones.
How do you know that?
Because he's a man.
A long time ago, men used to say, above all else, it's a man's duty to protect women. Sophia, men are better suited to killing up close.
So I bring that up because I think it's probably the biggest flaw within Geneshaft, although it doesn't terribly get in the way of the rest of the narrative of the story. So if I got that out of the way, I figured that perhaps we could move on to the other stuff that was actually pretty okay. Nika is a 16-year-old girl who leaves her mom and her super intelligent dog who can write full human thoughts in Japanese on Earth to go and serve on a space station in orbit near the moon. The station is currently observing a large ring of unknown origin, over 300 miles in diameter, that's been hovering in orbit near the Earth for the past 5 years. And just when a bunch of astronauts are about to go and examine it, the ring suddenly becomes active and blows the living hell out of part of the Earth and causes severe damage to the space station Nika has just arrived on, killing probably tens of thousands of people, including Mika's mom, presumably. Nika ends up joining the crew of a ship with her old friend Sophia and new acquaintances such as the genetic siblings Tiki and Mario, the genetically perfect Mir, and Captain Hiroto Amagiwa, whom Mika already hates because an old friend served a previous mission with him and died while under his command. Their mission becomes following the bizarre ring throughout space, studying it, and fighting it to protect the Earth and humanity from further attacks. All of this is done while under the command of Lord Sneak, and if his name alone doesn't already tell you he's up to no good, then I guess you're in for a lot of surprises. Very early on, from the first episode, it's clear clear he has ulterior motives in this mission against the alien ring, and he gives small lies amongst breadcrumbs of truths to further his personal mission, though you won't learn what that is for quite some time. But the mission involves breaking away from Earth's forces with no permission to do so, making their ship a new band of rebels in space, thinking that what they're doing is the right thing, when in reality nobody really has any idea what's actually happening. Well, no one except for Lord Sneak, perhaps. He seems to have all the answers and simply isn't sharing. A relatively unique addition to the series is the mecha called the Shaft, which is connected to the team's ship. Much like everything else in this 23rd century society, it appears to take very special genes to be able to pilot this uniquely designed CG giant robot. So let me talk about people's genes for a second here. I already talked about how people are engineered to be really good at certain tasks. Mir, for example, is supposed to be perfect at just about everything, and her attitude really shows it.
My pride won't allow me to operate such a defective program.
Now, gene types are coded by color, just about every color under the rainbow. But then there's also white. Mika's gene type, for example, is white. White typically means that the genes aren't mature and that they aren't special to doing anything in particular. It gives other people a reason to make fun of her.
You're not dumb, you just haven't matured yet. Don't forget your gene type is still white. Maybe you'll grow out of it.
But it also seems to mean that she has open potential to do all kinds of things, such as piloting the Shaft. But then at the same time, it also leads to lines that could really be considered inappropriate if heard out of context.
I chose you because I determined that you had the best chance of success.
Based on what?
Based on the fact that you're a white.
What's that supposed to mean?
Show me what a white is capable of.
So even though Mika is an often angry and emotional young lady, she becomes the star pilot of the Shaft, piloting it in several strange and unique fights against this bizarre ring. I'm hesitant to tell you guys about the origin of the ring or why it wants to kill humans, because actually I found that that was a pretty interesting part of sitting down and watching this series. But I will say that as time goes on throughout the show, you get some semi-decent introspective questions about what it truly means to be human and how man was meant to balance themselves against nature. There's an episode where, for some reason, NASA astronauts from the 21st century have time-slipped all the way to the 23rd thanks to the existence of the ring. And so there are some interesting questions brought up about what it really means to be human, or to have hope and goals, and even what it means to love, something the 23rd century seems to have attempted to rub out of society altogether in order to further avoid conflict. To speak a bit about the production of the series, you may find the character designs to be a little familiar, as it was directed by Kazuki Akane, who also worked on Escaflowne, Heat Guy J, and a number of other titles. I thought the CG of the ring, the ships, and the shaft, and all the mechanisms within were really going to clash with the 2D animated characters, but really it doesn't stand out nearly as bad as I've seen it in other series. While it's definitely a noticeable difference, I found myself more often than not ignoring it, which perhaps is the best thing I can say about such different looking animation styles. The rock and roll soundtrack in Geneshaft itself isn't bad. I think I could see myself listening to the music on its own just fine. However, I think the series was really trying to use the soundtrack to trick me into thinking that it was more extreme than it actually was. I don't really feel like the rock music went together with this series very well. Both of them on their own are just fine. Both of them together don't really work well.
As usual, the only thing superior about you is your enthusiasm. Didn't you get the point of that last operation?
What are you trying to say?
This is one situation where I was relatively satisfied with the English dub. Many of the voice actors are Bandai's old early 2000s standard wheelhouse actors, so you'll get voices such as Amanda Wynn Lee, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, Crispin Freeman, and even an appearance by Steve Bloom.
Hey, George, you got a lighter on you?
There really weren't any characters or voices I didn't like, aside from one, Dulce Saito, a 10-year-old girl who's a super genius computer programmer who only speaks through a toy doll and screeches like a banshee. I don't think you can blame her voice actress, Lonnie Manila, for this. I'm pretty sure the character is just written this loud and obnoxious, but I legitimately hated every moment she was on screen. I'd say that this series is relatively innocuous, and while not a brilliant and overly thought-provoking work, it's not nearly as stupid as the box art and the extreme rock and roll might have you believe. That having been said, perhaps its next biggest flaw is that it's only 13 episodes in length. By the time I got to the ending, I felt that the big threat to the planet was resolved, but not character motivations. I feel like the production simply ran out of time to tell the rest of the story. I can't help but feel like that manga, Geneshaft, likely gets more into the nitty-gritty of these interpersonal details, but I don't really know for sure. In general, it seems like this franchise has fallen off of many people's radars, even in Japan. It just doesn't have lasting power at all. That's too bad. It could have actually gone somewhere if given the right opportunity. Obviously, it hasn't lasted here in America either. The DVDs were once published by Bandai, but now it seems no one has saved the license of this series in the US. As a result, DVD copies of the complete collection can get somewhat expensive these days. The individual DVDs, however, can be found pretty cheap if you just want to collect them that way, which maybe you should. Again, the series isn't brilliant, but it has some good ideas thrown in here and there with an interesting robot design that, unfortunately, doesn't get to see a lot of robot-on-robot action. Ultimately, it's a cool design that I wish could have been utilized to do a whole lot more. Thanks again to jspsales, and now I'm completely open to doing new request reviews. If you would like for me to talk about a specific TV show, movie, or video game, simply check out patreon.com/MarzGurl and see how you can get your own request review.